Hi, welcome back to Cambridge Inside Out. I'm Judy Nathans,
And I'm Robert Winters.
and are we continuing our
We'll just say,
ordinance zoning
nah,
talk?
let's not waggle
Let's
on
not.
too much more about
Yeah,
zoning.
it's really, I mean,
It was only
it's
because
necessary, but
the one, it was
it's
sort
a
of like
biggie,
the big
and
item
it's-
this week, and we'll sort of
pay
see where that
attention
one
to it.
goes.
Right.
And we don't want to talk about trees or Inman Square or anything like that.
Well,
Enough
yeah,
of
I
that
don't know what
stuff, right?
happened to that.
Bike
Yeah.
lanes or all
Yeah.
this sort of aggravating
Well,
stuff.
it's just things are just going on and being built. By the way, what's going on behind the Harvest Co-op? What building is that? They took over a parking lot. All
Behind
of a
the
sudden,
Harvest
yeah, there's like a
Co-op.
whole building going up, right? On Essex Street or whatever that was.
Oh, yeah.
What is that?
So that's Morris Nagar's building. That actually came before the Central Square Advisory Committee.
But what
I
is it
chaired the
going
meeting.
to be?
Housing primarily. I think it's about
Condos,
in the vicinity
rentals?
rental, on the vicinity of about 40 condos.
So obviously not providing parking
It
because
was there's some, but not that
Really?
much. There'll be internal parking in the building, but the thing is that it's because it's like practically right on top of the T station. They didn't have to. There was a very minimal requirement for parking,
because they're
as should be
taking
the
away
case.
parking. Those were public parking spaces there in the back.
It were public parking spaces for the property owned by
No,
the
but
same
there were also
person running.
meters, unless they're not building.
That's
like that.
temporary. So there's
Oh.
ones that over at the corner of Bishop Allen and Essex Street, which is a city.
That's what I was saying. Is
but
that
they're-
still there?
It'll probably come back. It's just that they needed it for access to
Oh,
the site.
okay, so the building, the footprint isn't that whole corner lot?
no, not
Okay,
all the way down.
all right. I just
Yeah.
saw it from Mass.
Yeah. So actually, it's interesting. With a lot of zoning petitions and
Yeah.
yada yada over the last few years. Now, I mean, as we sit here in this studio,
Yeah.
I can look out this window and I
Yes.
see the center shaft from Mass and Main is now up to
Oh,
about
right.
2.5,
Oh, gosh.
3
look at that.
stories.
Yeah.
And there's a gigantic crane towering over the site.
Well, that's been there. What?
And then-
what is all the way down
And
there?
then there's the
What's that
Columbia
one?
Street side has
Columbia
that
Street.
building is actually going up.
Now, who owns
You
that?
can I
What's
can
that?
see the roof line over on Bishop Allen Drive for the housing that's already.
Yeah, but wait, what's the Columbia Street?
And then further down, that's also Massaman, same owners.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's all being developed simultaneously. And then
Oh.
further in the distance, I can see yet another crane, which is actually at Broadway and Binney, which is this big cantilever building that's going up there.
Wait,
Yeah. It's
further
funny
down,
actually from
okay.
my kitchen window at home, I can see the cranes. So
From
this
my
is
kitchen window, I can see the crane.
I
You're
can
not
see the
talking
cranes,
about
yeah.
the Japanese cranes. Okay.
That's right,
There we
yeah.
go. All right.
so
Well,
listen, people can have different opinions about the building and development or whatever, but
Mm-hmm.
I think these are pretty good things that are happening here. We're not overdoing it, but we are seeing some a little kick
I
in the
have to
pants
say, every
here.
time I turn around, I see a building, and it's
Yeah,
okay. It's just that
yeah.
as I get older, it's just like,
The cost of financing right now, has actually gone up. So
you think it's going to slow it down?
somewhat, yeah. So it's not going to be forever, but money was so cheap for a while.
True.
And
Well, I think everything's changing because
yeah,
tariffs,
things-
everything.
Yeah, everything's
Oh,
sort of
God.
changing. So,
Yeah.
so we're getting
Yeah.
our few licks in here, and I think it'll
All
be
right.
basically a pretty good thing here. So,
All right.
let me say something that's
Yeah.
completely off the
Off
the-
this whole thing.
little bit here. The one of the things that I got to do over the last couple of weeks
Yeah.
is one of my favorite things I do every year, which is the open archives tours.
Oh yeah, I
in
saw that
Cambridge.
on here. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Only you would. I'm not only you, but yeah, you like this kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, you should
I don't
show
know.
that. I don't know how.
I don't
we can
know.
do
I don't
this
know if we
now.
have it because
Yeah.
we're having nothing but darkness coming up
I
on the
know.
screen.
See
so
what he did? He ruined it for
yeah,
us
yeah.
there.
But I'll
Alright.
just have to allow the words to
Yeah,
create
it's
the
too bad.
pictures.
Yeah.
And just say here. So I went to, I think it was 5 of them. I think.
Yeah.
I went the Harvard map collection, which is really great, and they're now actually today, right now at this very moment,
Yeah.
they're having their opening for the 200th anniversary of the Harvard map collection.
Oh, I read about that. Yeah.
So that's in the Pusey Library
Oh.
on the Harvard campus, Harvard Yard.
So it's Harvard's doing that.
Yeah, and it's the biggest map collection in North
Wow.
America, and
Wow.
it's great. And 200th anniversary, and I got so we did one of the archive tours with that one. It was wonderful. A fellow named David was the guy who was sort of giving the tour, and he was just great. I didn't catch his last name.
So what's the schedule for that? You
That
don't have any dates on here, so I don't know.
well,
what-
Well, this is open. The public can go in, get access, or researchers can do it. I think it's.
You mean at the library or all these other places? You have all these other places mentioned here.
Yeah, well, the archives tours, unfortunately, are completed.
That
right?
Oh, those are completed.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. We just finished. They wrapped them up this past Thursday, I believe.
Oh.
So the Harvard map collection was wonderful. I also did the regular Harvard University archives.
Yeah,
Now,
I see that there. Yeah.
now, one of the things that was really great about this one, well, they had a lot of the collection from like the 1960s.
Yeah.
So all the protests.
Wow.
They had all the original stuff from like Timothy Leary when he was Harvard faculty, doing his sort of
He's
research
LSD
on
for those of you
LSD
that
and
yeah.
mind enhancing stuff. Actually, his picture shows up in yet another one of the exhibitions as well, which is funny. But one of the things that was really exciting for me was that there was a woman working with the Harvard University Archives who's actually doing archival work now for the Harvard Lampoon.
Oh.
Which is kind of a secretive organization, and they're not that eager to sort of invite everybody in, but apparently she's got some confidence of them, and honestly, they're not the best at archiving their own stuff.
So you
actually
went to the Lampoon?
No, I didn't go to the Lampoon. I've never been in that building. I'd love to go in the building.
That's probably where you can't get
right,
in.
but what was kind of great about it was that, so she knew a lot about from the Harvard Lampoon, but I knew a lot about some of the people who came out of the Harvard Lampoon.
Right, because we talked about that.
Who started the National Lampoon magazine, and I actually host the website that has all the covers of the National Lampoon. Those are from my own collection.
Huh.
And I had some stories about people who I met over the years and whatever. And actually, the person who was doing the archive didn't know about some of this stuff. So it wasn't just me getting information from the archives.
Do they have all
I
the
was giving
covers that you have?
No, because they're doing Harvard Lampoon, and what I have is more the National.
And they don't care about that.
Well, they do care because it's a lot of the same people. I mean, it's sort of.
So you could donate your collection like some of these big books.
Good, I suppose. But there is a kind of an interesting chronology of people who worked within Harvard Lampoon, like Conan O'Brien. And a lot of actually well-known figures came through the Harvard Lampoon organization, including a couple people like Doug Kenny, Henry Beard, who came out of there and formed the National Lampoon magazine. And then they actually were licensed to use the name Lampoon from the Harvard Lampoon for as long as they were in existence.
Is that still being published?
Nope. No, it ended in 1998.
You don't hear about it,
But the thing is that what they do, they still own the name for purposes of things like the Harvard Lampoon magazine. Not magazine, movies.
Oh.
There were various National Lampoon movies that were made, right? So anyway, it was nice being a part of the archive where I was actually able to kind of have an interchange with the people. And actually, there was one of the tours that we did last Thursday. Was actually the closing event. Was at the Houghton Library at Harvard. Yeah. And the theme on that one was about
lives in transit.
Lives in transit, and about passports. So these couple of
too bad we can't show this.
Yeah, it's a real shame here, but they had actual passports of some pretty famous individuals.
George Balanchine.
So George Balanchine of the founder of the New York City Ballet, and had his passports, multiple passports over the years. Very dapper fellow. He always posed for his passport photos. It was quite nice. And then they actually had the passport of Leon Trotsky.
My goodness.
Which was, and also apparently when he was sort of escaping prosecution, of course he didn't make, eventually he made it to I think South America, but then he was murdered.
Oh,
But
wow,
but there's actually a letter explaining his passport from I think Turkey, where
Yeah.
because it was a real adventure apparently getting
Yeah.
Trotsky out of there. So there it is, his passport picture right there. There's his passport right there in front of you. It was funny as hell. And there was also a one, Timothy Leary comes back to bite us too, where apparently when he was being prosecuted, he created a fake passport, and they actually have in their archives the fake passport photos from Timothy
Wow.
Leary and this gal as well. So it was very entertaining, and I was actually helping them out because one of the curators was a fellow who was very much focusing on the Armenian genocide.
Oh, yeah.
And and it was related to his own family history there too. So I was able to put him in touch with a friend of mine who's a videographer, who's also Armenian, who actually did a whole history of the Armenian community in Watertown,
Oh.
and the history of the Hood rubber plant, which is really one of the great employers of when Armenians were coming over to this country. So so it was nice, you know. Again, I go to the archive to see good stuff, but I got to
Yeah.
actually make
How
connections
nice.
with others.
So nice you did all that.
Yeah.
I think that just
And
passed
you know,
people by.
actually, I'll tell you two others. I'm obsessing.
Yeah, you are.
I am obsessing. But it's one of my favorite things to do. And not obsessing, but do an
We
archive
didn't
series.
talk about it though enough on the show. We didn't say, "Hey, this is happening," did we? I mean, it's in your website. It's
Yeah,
true, but-
yeah. Well, the thing
Yeah.
is that I actually couldn't. I wasn't, because the announcement of it came out late, and I was only able to sign on to some, so I got on a wait list for some.
Oh,
So I didn't
you
even
had to
know as I
sign
was
up for some of
able
them,
to go.
yeah, right.
So I was able to get in via the wait list to go to
I
the one out in
see.
Mount Auburn Cemetery. Now, the Mount Auburn Cemetery one is always a good thing.
Wow. Yeah.
But then my other favorite one is actually go down in the Department of Public Works.
Oh, that would have been nice.
And
Oh,
I
we
actually
should've done
couldn't get to it,
that. Oh.
but George, who put out the materials, he contacted me and says,
Yeah.
"Hey, I'm going to keep the materials out. Why don't you just give me a call when you want to come down, and we'll do it."
And you did it?
So I got my own private tour.
Wow.
And I got to tell you, that is, you know, for
You
infrastructure
could have told me
geeks like
about
me.
it. Jeez.
Well, no, George, I said, how about 10:30? Can I come over now?
Alright,
And that's how
okay.
it happened, right?
So how often do they do these open archives?
They do it
It's-
once a year.
They do.
And
All right.
And
I'll,
some
I'll
of the,
put on my radar. Let me know next year.
it's always around this
Okay.
time of year.
Okay.
And the one at Public Works is kind of cool for infrastructure geeks, because they have the original drawn plans for the aqueducts that convey the water
Wow.
from
Yeah.
Stony Brook Basin into Fresh Pond. Beautiful. I mean, these things are so beautiful. You want them on your wall.
Wow.
They
Yeah.
are
No.
that
No.
good looking.
Yeah.
You know, but and not just that, but even the architecture that went into sewer design
Sure.
back then. It's really beautiful.
People design them.
Yeah.
Well. Yeah.
So, you know, this is great stuff. You know, actually, the one archive I would love to visit, which wasn't on the schedule this year, was the city clerks. You know, just, you know, some of the records from the city clerk.
So do they change it each year? It's different archives?
Some of them change. Some of them will
Or the
repeat.
same, yeah.
Yes, I've actually done the Mount Auburn one 3 times now.
Oh.
Yeah. But the Cambridge room at the Cambridge Public Library with Alyssa Pacey is great.
But that
They didn't
also,
do it this year.
you can go when she's, well, I think she's on maternity
Yeah.
leave now, but you can go, I mean,
Yep.
to look at archives.
Yeah, oh yeah,
it's
you can
always
do
there,
it.
right?
You know,
Yeah.
it's actually one of the greatest things about living in Cambridge.
Yeah.
It's
The
a city
Cambridge
with a
room.
lot of history.
It is, and
it's
and
all
they
around.
preserve
and,
it well.
and not
Yeah.
only history, but also 2 universities
Right.
that are the repositories of collections that are worldwide. You know, so if you're a history geek, this is one of the best places on earth. to
And I
live.
have to do a shout out to Alyssa Pacey and Drew Griffin, who have been running genealogy workshops
Yeah.
all year. I've taken a couple of them, and they're so popular. And so just look it up. It's amazing what you can do in this city.
Yeah. So anyway, so that was a good time.
Great.
So,
All right. So you did the archives.
yeah, we did the archives.
All right.
So let's see. So what else is going on around town?
Whew.
Well, maybe say a couple of the little miscellaneous
Well,
things.
what else
that-
happened last night?
yesterday?
Yeah.
Well, I think one thing is they got back a report, and the city signed on with a bunch of other.
They got back a lot of reports.
Actually,
Which
it was
makes sense.
yeah.
'cause
It,
it's
it
June,
was
yeah.
it's like a regular library.
Right.
The city manager's agenda was
Right.
like the reading
There
room.
was like
Yeah.
18 of them. Or
Something.
I don't know.
But they actually had a report on autonomous vehicles.
Oh,
now,
yeah.
I mean, it's nothing to report so much, but other than to say that the region, you know, rather than have the manufacturers and developers of autonomous vehicles make separate agreements with every single city
Yeah.
with their own separate little agreements and separate conditions, whatever. What they're doing is this sort of a compact of cities and towns in the metropolitan region who basically signed on to permit kind of across multiple cities testing of these autonomous vehicles. But at the same time, with each city still having the right to impose additional restrictions if they so wish,
Yeah.
right? But so that'll facilitate this testing. I'm a bit skeptical of it all, and I also
Please, no.
I
I'm
know.
just, between,
Well, you know when they replaced them horses and
Recreation.
buggies by them
I know,
what do
know,
they call them?
stone-
Horseless carriages.
stone
People
people
thought
and
they were scared to death.
stone people and autonomous vehicles.
Well, not only
walking
that,
around.
I was thinking out today. I was thinking, would a autonomous vehicle be able to tell the difference between a statue and a person
Because they're not moving?
because they're not moving. And what if somebody's just standing on a corner motionless? Would they be able to tell it's a person and not a statue?
I think they're doing things like that. Maybe infrared?
Right. Well, I'm actually on multiple lists, including ones having to do with cyclists. This is nationally saying they have some concerns because they want it to make it, bottom line, and this is a good idea, insistent that any testing of autonomous vehicles must pass what they're calling a vision test, which means they must, without any exceptions, be able to fully detect pedestrians and cyclists.
Yeah, well, I think they're doing all that, isn't it?
I think they're doing it, but the thing is that.
First thing
but I think they're probably the first order of testing is to make sure that vehicles can recognize vehicles, etc. But
not in the city. You have to recognize people crossing the street.
You certainly do, right?
Because people cross the street against the light,
there's the sort of the fatality in Arizona that everybody's pointing to, where it was a woman walking her bicycle across a street, but it was in the middle of the night.
Oh.
And
why were they doing an autonomous vehicle? They're testing it?
Testing, and they actually had drivers in the vehicle, but they were just watching the voice on TV.
Okay, so let's back up here. When we say autonomous vehicle, is there always someone inside?
Not in the currently, I think yes.
You have
in
to
the
have
future,
someone, right?
Not necessarily.
Oh, well,
yeah.
That's a way.
It's a matter of how much faith do you want to put in the machines, right?
Yeah,
I don't know.
I just feel like to get to that point, you have to build a new city. You have to build the infrastructure to support that, because we keep trying to put things into an old infrastructure, and we see how already it's causing, with the bike lane. I mean, it's all needed, but there's just so much you can do to change what's here.
Well, and I'm more of a compromiser,
Oh, I am too,
and actually, we were at that conference about autonomous vehicles
where
they.
A while ago,
yeah. 2 summers ago.
They called them driverless vehicles.
Driverless vehicles.
But there's someone in the car, but they just weren't driving.
Right.
They were letting the machine drive it, but they're supposed to be able to jump in if something's wrong.
Yeah.
Then what's the point?
Now, one of the things they said at this, and some of this stuff I guess I thought about, but a lot of it I didn't.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things they said is that if vehicles all have sensors like this, at least they say you don't need traffic lights anymore because they can just pass through each other like waves.
Oh my gosh!
And they'll just zip right
but
through,
and
they'll
never touch
each other.
Everyone's in the same thing.
Right. The thing is driver vehicles and driverless vehicles become incompatible at some point.
I think lots of things are incompatible right now.
I agree. But here's some other thing that I didn't think about before. They said is that the convenience of these things means nobody will own a vehicle in the future. They'll just call a car and it'll come and get you.
So rather than Uber, it'll be Uberless.
It'll be like Uberless, yeah.
Oh.
And because unlike public transportation right now basically follows fixed routes, these wouldn't have to follow fixed routes. So it would be a great threat to public transportation potentially, because people will say, well, why should I take the bus or the subway when I can just have the Uber?
Uber and Lyft is already threatening. Not threatening, but a lot of younger people use it. Just spend a lot of money and they don't use public transit. I mean, it does run at night.
The pricing structure may dictate what people do and don't use.
You have to,
But the thing is that there will be. I mean, 2 summers ago at this conference, they said it is likely that the movement of people back into the cities because of the difficulty of driving into work and the convenience of living closer to work, that may drift back out again, because now if you don't have to own your own motor vehicle, you can live a little further out and then
it'll drop you off and
just
go back.
car will drive. Yeah. So the thing is that the current trend may reverse again. People live a little further out in the suburbs a little bit again because they can. So that was one of the other predictions. The other prediction was just that, unlike a train that's carrying a lot of people on it, if you have everybody in their own little autonomous, and they'll all be nice electric vehicles, right? So they're going to be environmentally friendly. So the argument of that these motorized vehicles being terrible for the environment sort of falls apart, right? Like if they do develop the appropriate electrical infrastructure.
But there could be buses that are electric. electric and.
I imagine there'll be some of this because you
More
made
than just single people.
there'll be some
Yeah.
circumstances where moving people in mass will still
Or
make some
shared
sense.
cars, because not everyone has to own a car.
Right.
That's the whole
And then
share
maybe
economy
trains
too.
may be for intercity transport, but not so much intra-city transport.
Yeah.
But there's going to be a lot more vehicles on the road.
Yep.
I think that the argument for bicycling starts to lose its luster a bit when in fact the motor vehicle is just as environmentally friendly as the bicycle
And
now.
also, we now have the electric scooters,
Right.
which we saw the other day,
and
going right along the bike lane.
right, and then they can take you
Yeah.
places where it would be a struggle with
So,
the bike.
yeah, electric vehicles of all sorts. I mean,
And they
yeah.
work in all weather, whereas the bikes it's a little
Right.
harder. So as we redesign infrastructure with a certain goal in mind, the future may actually dictate otherwise.
Which I have to give credit to Craig Kelly around these stuff.
Oh, yeah.
He looks
He's
at
at least
every
thinking about
bit
it.
of mobility that's
Yeah,
out
the
there.
the bigger picture.
Electric, of it.
Yeah.
He really does. So.
Yeah, and so far, by the way, because there is a mobility working group of Envision
Mm-hmm.
Cambridge, and I was looking at some of their initial recommendations, and honestly, I think Craig Kelly could probably rewrite the whole thing and come up with better recommendations than they came out with, because they're still sort of wedded toward bicycle infrastructure as sort of the be-all,
Right.
end-all,
Yeah.
and that's all well and good, but it doesn't really look down the road very far. And if you think that 50% of the people are going to be going to and from work on bikes, when there are driverless vehicles that may be cost effective, whatever, I think maybe you got to think about that
No,
again.
I don't know. I think it's gonna be a while before we really see this. I mean, look how
Yeah.
long it's taken for the marijuana, and now we got Healy saying that people can roll back till a year. I mean, it's really
Yeah.
interesting to see all that. But
All right. So that was one thing. And I don't actually know. I mean, this is just a report. They just referred it, and then you'll start to see it. They'll probably announce routes where the driverless vehicle testing will take place, just to sort of warn people if they really are scared or something like that.
I think Jan Devereaux is having a meeting this summer that she's asked to be televised about electric vehicles in general, or about, is
Yeah.
it just about
Actually-
short, or is it about all electric
Actually, there's
vehicles?
another meeting. She had a communication into the council notes for the week
Yeah,
saying that she plans to hold a meeting this summer having
thought
to
that
do
was it.
with early voting for municipal elections
that-
as
well,
well.
wait a minute, but that came up, talk about that, that came up on the
Yeah, so-
agenda as a
right.
policy order, right?
Right. So the thing is that there was also a communication from the city solicitor that wasn't directly to the council, but I think it was to Councilor Devereaux.
Oh,
But it was made available through the communication from Councilor Devereaux, basically saying that the city cannot enact early voting for municipal elections because
oh,
that state law made that an option for state
Presidential.
elections, presidential
state,
elections.
but not for city.
And I think
Okay.
they're talking about expanding it to the primaries,
Yeah,
but there's no mention at all for
Yeah.
municipal elections.
I find that it's unnecessary.
I think it's completely unnecessary.
Wasn't there a really big turnout this last election?
Yeah, it was a huge
What was the
jump.
percentage?
Oh, I forget exactly, but it was a big
It had
jump
been
over
17
what
and
had
then it was
been.
23. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I just feel like
there are
it's
things
a
that
waste
are
of resources.
right now. There are certain things that are kind of trendy. Early voting is one of them. Automatic voter registration is another one.
Well, I like that one.
Right. I mean, so
I
there's
think registration needs
right.
to.
There are people who are promoting ranked choice voting as a electoral reform as well. So we are in a period now where people are trying to push various electoral
Well,
reforms.
Yeah,
But to me, there are certain ones that are effective and certain
Yeah.
ones are just sort of window dressing.
yeah.
You know?
Early voting for municipal elections that's not why
you know,
people do not vote.
I think the early
Yeah.
voting for the presidential election worked out well because you always have very high voter turnout at the presidential elections.
Right.
And then this way, you were able to. I mean, I laugh about it a little bit because I saw these long lines of people waiting to vote in the early voting in 5 locations around the city,
Yeah.
right? And then when I went to vote on election day,
Yeah,
no lines at
I know,
all,
I know.
right? So it was all about this way you should vote early so you can avoid the lines. Yet in fact, if you voted early, you encountered the lines, and some
And
people
also,
were waiting
but
2
like
hours.
you said, you can actually
No
go.
lines for me.
You can go into the election
You can
office a week ahead, or as soon as the
You
ballots
can do
out.
absentee voting, and in
No,
fact,
but you can actually go in and vote.
Yeah.
Or is that early voting?
that was early voting, but the thing is, you've always been able to do absentee voting, but you used to have to give a serious excuse,
Right,
like
you'd be out of town.
I'll be out of
or
town, or
okay.
whatever, or people just fibbed, right?
And you don't,
But
but now they,
I think that also, if they haven't already made that reform at the State House, they certainly will at some point to say, look, if we allow absentee voting, let's just allow absentee voting and be done
Yeah.
with it, right?
right, because in a
And
way,
that's a really simple reform.
and that would not require a lot of personnel.
No, and
Yeah.
there is actually a considerable cost associated with early voting. So if you think, oh, look at me,
Did you hear Polly Cobb's testimony?
I was talking to Polly, but I was talking to somebody else when she gave us her.
Yeah, it was very, very convincing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I say pick the low hanging fruit, solve the problems that are problems before you start solving the things that aren't yet problems. But in fact, apparently, I think Councilor Devereaux is the chair of the Government Operations Committee, and
So what does that mean?
she
wants
intends to
have
hold a meeting on this. And,
I think the issue around municipal elections is the complexity of our ballot and understanding PR.
Yeah.
That is maybe what keeps some people maybe from voting,
maybe
but I
some
think
people,
that, and you also have to be living here and care about the issues. So I don't
Right.
think it's because they can't get to
And
the polls.
the thing is, I've always said this, that the bigger problem is not strictly voter turnout. It's ensuring that those who do turn out are representative of all, right? So
Right.
if all the
Right.
wards in all the city all had more or less the same percentage turnout, then it would be a good representation.
Right.
The outcome would reflect what people wanted.
And so far, does it pan
No,
out
no,
that way?
no.
There is
The problem is
underrepresented
there are
areas.
certain areas, certain demographics
Yeah.
that are underrepresented
True.
and others that are overrepresented.
So
That's
maybe
the
work.
issue.
So maybe work on getting that
We work
more.
on that, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would, because I am an election geek, say that I would actually recommend limiting the number of rankings for the city council race to.
That would make it easier.
You can limit it to no fewer than 15. So I'd say do that.
Yeah.
You don't need, if you got 29 candidates,
Yeah.
ranking 29 candidates has no value
To just
at
really
all.
emphasize just
And
to
I can
rank
prove
15. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we just
So,
have 10 seconds left?
We're down to our last few
Okay.
seconds. So
Are we
anyway,
here next week? Even though
I
there's
think
no. Yeah, we can be here.
We'll go for next week.
All right,
so
we'll go for next
See you then
See you
on
then.
Inside Out.